I never thought it would come to this. 5 years of marriage, 5 years of building a life. Together, all unraveling in front of me like a cruel joke. I sit alone in the dark of our apartment, the soft hum of the Chicago traffic filling the silence she left behind. Emily's out tonight, and for the first time I know exactly where she is, and more importantly, who she's with. Her name used to be the sweetest sound to me. Emily. My wife. The woman who made me believe in soulmates, who once looked at me like I was the only man in the world. I can still remember the night we met, one of those warm summer evenings in a packed bar. Downtown. She wore this emerald green dress, her blonde hair spilling over her shoulders, her laugh like music cutting through the crowd. I was just a guy at the bar with a whiskey in hand, but when she looked at me, I felt like I'd won the lottery. Back then, it was all so simple. She loved me, I loved her. We didn't need grand gestures or perfect moments. We were happy with each other, and that was enough. Or at least that's what I thought. I thought we were untouchable. But now, everything feels like a lie. The warmth in her eyes has been replaced with something colder, distant. I used to know every detail of her day, her thoughts, her dreams, but lately she's been slipping away. She's out late more often, giving me vague excuses that never quite add up, her phone glued to her hand, her laugh sounding different, hollow, like she's laughing at some private joke I'll never be in on. At first, I told myself it was all in my head. Paranoia, insecurity. Maybe I wasn't giving her enough attention. Maybe I was imagining things. But the signs were there and they kept piling up until they were impossible to ignore. One night, a few weeks ago, her phone buzzed on the counter while she was in the shower. Just a name on the screen, Adam. Simple name, but it felt like a knife to the gut. I tried to brush it off, to tell myself it was just a friend, maybe a colleague from work. But then, I saw her text history with him, and the truth I'd been avoiding hit me like a slap in the face. The messages weren't the kind you send to a friend. They were intimate, familiar, the kind of words you say when you're building a future with someone. I knew right then that she wasn't just drifting away from me. She was already halfway gone, slipping into a life with someone else. I could have confronted her that night. I could have thrown her phone across the room, demanded answers, forced her to explain why she was betraying everything we'd built together. But something stopped me. Instead, I sat there in the dark, feeling every inch of my world crack around me. I didn't want to scream. I didn't want to beg. I wanted her to understand what she was about to lose. So I decided on something different. One last date. One final night together. A chance for her to see what we once had, what we were supposed to be. I want to remind her of everything we've been through, every promise we made, every dream we shared. I want her to look me in the eyes and remember what she's throwing away. And maybe, just maybe, I want to see if she'll choose me one last time. Tomorrow night, I'm taking her back to the beginning. Back to the places we once loved, the memories we once shared. I'll sit across from her, look into those familiar blue eyes, and wait for her to see me, to really see me the way she used to. It's a gamble. I know that. But I need to know if there's anything left worth fighting for, or if the woman I loved is already gone, buried beneath the lies she's been telling me. Tomorrow night, it's all or nothing. It all started with the little things, details that seemed harmless, insignificant until I started connecting them in my mind, and they turned into something darker. It was a Tuesday evening about 3 months ago. I remember because we were supposed to go to dinner with some friends, a double date we'd had planned for weeks. But at the last minute, Emily came home from work and told me she wasn't feeling up to it. Her excuse was simple. A headache, she said, rubbing her temples as if the pain was unbearable. She gave me a tired smile, said she was sorry, and urged me to go without her. I hesitated. We'd both been looking forward to this night, and it wasn't like her to cancel plans last minute. But I brushed it off. After all, people get headaches. No reason to make a big deal out of it. Except that night, when I got home, I found her sitting on the couch, looking down at her phone, her face illuminated by the pale blue glow of the screen. She didn't notice me at first, so I just stood there, watching her. I couldn't help it. There was something about her expression, something so far away, like she was lost in a world I wasn't part of. When she finally noticed me, she jumped, a look of surprise, maybe even guilt, flashing across her face. But she recovered quickly, slipping her phone into her lap, her lips curving into a familiar smile. But that smile, it didn't feel right. It was empty, as if she was forcing herself to act normal. She told me she was feeling better, asked about my night, laughed at my jokes, but there was a distance in her eyes that hadn't been there before. After that night, I started noticing it more often. She became more protective of her phone, keeping it face down on the table whenever we were together, checking it constantly, always, with that faint hint of a smile that she seemed to be hiding from me. I'd walk into a room and see her glance at her screen, her face softening in a way that wasn't meant for me. Then, she'd look up, see me watching her, and her expression would change like she was putting on a mask. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was all in my head. Maybe she was just stressed from work. Maybe she needed more space. We'd been together 5 years. People change, I thought. I didn't want to be that guy, the jealous husband who reads too much into things. So I gave her the benefit of the doubt. I tried to believe that whatever was going on was harmless, that she would come back to me when she was ready. But the doubt was there, gnawing at me no matter how much I tried to push it away. Couldn't shake the feeling that there was something or someone pulling her away from me. Then one night, the doubt turned into something solid, something undeniable. Emily was in the shower, and her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I'd grown used to hearing that sound, the soft, constant vibration that had become a background noise in our home. But this time, something compelled me to look. Maybe it was the silence of the apartment, the way the shadows seemed to close in around me, pressing down on me with a weight I couldn't ignore. I walked over to her side of the bed, and there it was, her phone lit up with a new message. The name on the screen read, Adam. Just seeing it made my pulse quicken. Didn't know any Adam in her life. We'd been together long enough that I knew all her friends, her co-workers, her acquaintances. But this name, this was someone I'd never heard of before. My heart pounded as I stared at that single word, feeling like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing that once I looked, there would be no turning back. And yet I couldn't stop myself. My hand moved as if on its own, reaching for the phone, swiping up to read the message. I miss you too. Can't wait to see you again. Beautiful. Those words, that message. It hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood there, feeling the room tilt around me, my breath caught in my throat. I must have read it a dozen times, hoping the words would change, that I'd somehow misread it. But no, the message was clear. This wasn't some casual conversation with a friend. This was something else, something intimate, something that didn't belong to me. I put her phone back exactly as I'd found it, heart pounding, my mind racing. The shower was still running, and I knew I didn't have much time. I slipped back into the hallway, trying to gather myself, to calm the storm brewing inside me. I couldn't let her see that I knew. Not yet. If I confronted her now, if I let my emotions get the best of me, she'd deny it, brush it off, find a way to lie her way out of it. I needed to know more. I needed proof. In that moment, I made a decision that changed everything. I would watch her quietly, from the shadows. I would gather every scrap of evidence, every trace of the lies she was hiding from me. I didn't know where this would lead, didn't know how deep her betrayal ran. But I was done being the clueless husband. If she was keeping secrets from me, then I would find out the truth one way or another. And so began my investigation. Emily had no idea, of course. She went about her days, smiling her practiced smile, kissing me goodnight with that same hollow warmth that now made my skin crawl. But I wasn't the same man anymore. I watched her every move, noted every excuse, every slip of the tongue. I became a stranger in my own marriage, an investigator gathering evidence against the woman I once trusted more than anyone in the world. I thought of the message every time I looked at her. Can't wait to see you again. Beautiful. The words haunted me, burned into my mind, twisting everything she said into lies, every touch into a betrayal. And though I kept my face neutral, my tone calm, inside I was unraveling. The worst part was, she had no idea. She didn't know that every time she turned away from me, I was watching, waiting. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and soon I knew I would have the truth. But I had no idea what I would do once I had it. The days after I read that message, I felt like a stranger in my own home. I watched Emily with a careful eye, every move she made feeding a growing dread inside me. I'd noticed the way she'd smile at her phone, a soft, private smile I hadn't seen directed at me in months. The way she kept glancing at the time, as if counting down the minutes until she could slip away. I started my own quiet investigation. I'd check her phone when she wasn't around, scan through her messages for any sign of Adam, but she'd gotten smarter. She'd erased most of their exchanges, leaving only traces, enough to keep me guessing. Frustration mounted as I pieced together fragments, a vague email here, a sudden work meeting there. But I still didn't have proof. I didn't have anything that could definitively confirm what my gut was screaming at me. Then one Friday night I decided to follow her. She told me she was meeting friends for dinner, but I knew her well enough to see the lie. Her eyes darted to the left when she spoke. Her hand fidgeted with her necklace. So when she left, I waited a few minutes, then grabbed my keys and followed, keeping enough distance to go unnoticed. Her car led me through the dim streets of downtown, winding past our usual haunts, until finally, she pulled into a small parking lot beside a quiet hotel. The kind of place couples meet when they don't want anyone else to know. I parked a block away and walked slowly toward the hotel, blending into the shadows, heart pounding as if I were the one committing a crime. I didn't want to be here, didn't want to see whatever I was about to find. But something kept pushing me forward, some dark need to see the truth with my own eyes. I waited in the lobby, a safe distance behind a potted plant, watching as Emily appeared, her eyes scanning the room. And then he walked in. Adam. He looked exactly like I'd imagined, tall, sharp suit, that casual confidence of a man who thinks he's untouchable. She lifted her hand, as if out of instinct, reaching for him, her fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. He leaned down, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that started soft but deepened quickly, a rough, almost possessive hunger. She melted into him, tilting her head to let him take the lead, her hands sliding up to grip his shoulders. I watched, frozen, as they stood there, oblivious to the world around them. Her cheeks flushed as he whispered something in her ear, and she laughed, her breath catching in a way I hadn't heard in months. She looked different, alive, like she was letting herself be seen in a way she'd stopped doing with me long ago. I tried to turn away, to stop watching, but I couldn't. It was as if I were trapped, held in place by the sheer shock of it, the brutal realization that I was witnessing my wife with someone else, witnessing a version of her I hadn't seen in years. She looked at him with something raw in her eyes, a hint of longing and excitement that cut straight through me. She leaned in, pressing her lips to his again, slower this time, savoring it, letting him guide her with a steady, practiced grip. I don't know how long I stood there, just watching them, feeling my heart pound out a furious beat in my chest. Finally, she pulled away, laughing softly as she reached for her glass of wine, taking a slow, measured sip, her eyes never leaving his. She returned to the table, the two of them close, her hand resting on his arm as they spoke in low voices. It was then that I turned away, while rising in my throat. My fists clenched so tight my nails bit into my palms. I walked out of the hotel, each step heavy, as if dragging a part of myself, away from everything I'd once trusted, everything I'd once known. When I decided to invite Emily on one last date, it felt strange, like planning a farewell for a love that hadn't quite died, but was being buried all the same. I chose the restaurant where we'd gone on our first anniversary, a cozy, dimly lit place on the edge of the city with soft jazz, music and warm lighting that made everything feel nostalgic, timeless. I wanted her to remember what we'd once been, to feel the weight of every moment we'd shared, of everything she was throwing away. She arrived right on time, wearing that familiar blue dress, her hair pulled back in the way she knew I liked. As she walked toward me, I felt the oddest mix of heartbreak and anger, like looking at a beautiful memory that had turned bitter. For a second, I almost forgot everything I'd seen, almost convinced myself that she was still the woman I married, that all of this was some nightmare I could wake up from. We sat down, and I watched her settle into her chair, flashing me that same easy smile she always did, the one she'd given me on 100 date nights, 1,000 mornings. And I couldn't help it. Memories started flooding back, moments that felt like a lifetime ago. I remembered the first time we'd gone out together, how she'd been so shy at first, how she'd laughed so hard she'd nearly choked on her wine. I remembered lazy Sunday mornings in bed, her hair a mess, her eyes half closed as she leaned into me, the way she'd smile when she looked at me like I was her whole world. But those moments were gone now, buried under the weight of lies and stolen glances with another man. And yet, tonight, she sat across from me like nothing had changed, like we were still the same couple we'd been all those years ago. As the dinner went on, I kept my voice light, kept my words gentle. But there was something in my tone that even she couldn't miss. I started mentioning places we hadn't been to in a while, memories we hadn't revisited, testing her, watching her expression for any hint that she might feel some flicker of guilt or remorse. "Remember that cabin in Michigan?" I asked, swirling the wine in my glass, pretending to be lost in thought. "The one we rented that fall? Just the two of us with nothing around for miles. Those mornings watching the sun rise over the lake. You looked so happy there." She nodded, but there was a distance in her eyes, like she was struggling to remember something from a dream. I could almost see her mind working, searching for the right words to say, the way people do when they're trying to seem sincere. But her smile was soft, her expression perfectly rehearsed. As the evening continued, I kept pressing, talking about our memories in a way that was careful, calculated. Each one was another nudge, a subtle reminder of what she was trading away. "Funny, isn't it?" I said, letting my voice drop just a bit. "How some things seem so permanent, like no matter what happens, they'll always be there." I let my gaze settle on her, watching her reaction, kind of like us. I always thought we were unbreakable. For the first time, she looked uncomfortable, shifting in her seat as she forced a smile. "Of course," she said, her voice a little too smooth. "I mean, we've been through so much together." I could see the walls she was trying to keep up, the careful mask she'd worn for so long. But I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. "It's strange, though," I continued, pausing just long enough to let her feel the weight of my words. "Sometimes it feels like we're not quite here, you know? Like we're just going through the motions." I looked at her directly then, searching her face for any sign of the guilt she should be feeling. "Have you ever felt that way, Em?" Her eyes flickered, and for a moment, I saw a crack in her armor. She glanced down, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. I guess things have been a bit different lately," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "Life gets complicated sometimes." The understatement hit me like a slap. Complicated. That's what she called sneaking around behind my back, lying to my face, building a life with another man. She had no idea I'd seen her with him, that I knew exactly what complicated meant. I forced a smile, trying to keep my voice steady. Yeah, complicated. I guess it does. I let the silence linger, let her sit with the tension between us, hoping it would crack her facade just a bit more. For a second, I thought she might say something, that she might finally admit to what she'd been doing. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. Her eyes darted away, her expression wavering like she was on the edge of confessing. But then she took a deep breath, plastering on that same perfect smile, and leaned back in her chair as if nothing was wrong. Couldn't believe it. After everything, the lies, the stolen glances, the secret meetings, she was going to sit there and pretend like none of it had happened. Like I hadn't seen her with him, like I hadn't caught her in every little lie. We finished our meal in silence, the weight of the unsaid words pressing down on us. She was trying to act casual, but I could see the tension in her eyes, feel the stiffness in her shoulders. She must have known something was off, that I was hinting at something, but she couldn't quite bring herself to ask what. And maybe that's what hurt the most. The fact that she wouldn't even acknowledge it. She would rather keep lying, keep pretending, than confront what we both knew was true. By the time we finished, the air between us was thick with everything we hadn't said. Wanted to scream, to shatter her composure, to force her to admit the truth. But instead I kept my voice calm, collected, as I leaned across the table, my eyes never leaving hers. "Thank you for tonight," I said, my tone deliberately steady, my words carefully chosen. "I needed this. Just one last night to remember us, you know." Her smile faltered, just for a second, but she quickly recovered. "Of course, Lucas. It's good to look back, isn't it?" I nodded slowly, keeping my face expressionless. "Yes, it is." And as I said the words, I saw it. A flicker of fear, a spark of realization that I knew more than I was letting on. She looked down at her empty glass, her fingers trembling ever so slightly as she set it back on the table. Tomorrow I'd confront her. Tomorrow there'd be no more pretense, no more pretending. But tonight I wanted her to sit with the weight of what she'd done, to feel, even if just for a moment, the depth of the betrayal I'd been forced to live with. Tonight, I wanted her to understand just how much she'd lost. The next morning dawned gray and silent. I woke up before Emily, lying in bed beside her as I listened to her steady breathing, watching the light filter through the blinds. Felt strange, knowing that by the end of the day, everything we'd built would be shattered. But I couldn't hold on to a lie anymore, and neither could she. When she finally stirred, she looked over at me, her expression soft, warm, almost like it used to be. For a split second, I wondered if she'd felt something last night, if the weight of all those memories we'd shared had broken through whatever wall she'd built between us. But as her eyes met mine, the moment passed, her face falling into that same guarded expression she'd worn for months. We moved through the morning in silence. It wasn't until after breakfast, as she was clearing her plate, that I finally spoke. "Emily," I said, my voice calm but firm, "we need to talk." She froze, the color draining from her face. She set down her plate slowly, turning to face me. "Sure," she said, forcing a casual tone. "What's on your mind?" I took a deep breath, watching her, waiting for any sign that she might confess, that she might have the decency to tell me the truth before I had to drag it out of her. But she just stood there, arms crossed, waiting for me to speak. "I know about Adam," I said finally, the words heavy in the silence between us. Her face went pale, her expression shifting from shock to something close to panic. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me, Emily," I said, my voice harder than I intended. "I know everything. I saw the messages. I followed you to that hotel. I know about every single lie you've told me." She looked down, her shoulders sagging as if all the fight had drained out of her. For a moment, she was silent, staring at the floor, her chest rising and falling as she took a deep breath. When she looked back up, her eyes were wet, her face crumpling in a way I hadn't seen before. I never wanted to hurt you, Lucas, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I swear it wasn't supposed to be like this. Then what was it supposed to be, Emily? I asked, my voice raw. Tell me, because from where I'm standing, it looks like you were ready to walk out on everything we built together. Without a second thought, she sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. I don't know, she said, her voice muffled. I lost myself somewhere along the way. I was unhappy, and I didn't know how to tell you. And then I met him, and it felt different. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. So, that's it, I asked, my voice breaking. You found something different, and suddenly everything we had meant nothing? She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No, that's not what I meant. I don't know. I thought maybe I could find happiness again with him. I don't know. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. You have one night, I said, my tone flat. The decision already made. One night to decide what you want. If you still want him, if you still think he's worth throwing all of this away, then I won't stop you. But if there's even a part of you that thinks we can fix this, that thinks you still want a life with me, then you stay. But after tonight, there's no turning back. She looked up at me, eyes wide, shocked. Lucas. I held up a hand, cutting her off. I'm done waiting, Emily. You make a choice, him or me. And whichever choice you make, you live with it. Without another word, I walked out of the room, leaving her there, alone with the silence and the weight of her own decision. I didn't know if she'd stay or if she'd go. And maybe, deep down, I didn't want to know. But one thing was clear, by the end of the night, this chapter of our lives would be over one way or another. That evening, I came home to find her waiting for me, her suitcase by the door. Her face was pale, eyes red-rimmed, but there was a calmness to her that hadn't been there before. She looked at me, her expression somewhere between heartbreak and resolve. I'm sorry, Lucas, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I tried, but I can't pretend anymore. Can't stay. My chest tightened, a pain sharper than anything I'd felt before, but I managed a nod. Then, go. She reached for the suitcase, hesitating, as if waiting for me to stop her, to beg her to change her mind. But I stayed silent, letting the moment hang in the air. She gave a small nod, then turned, opening the door and stepping out of our home for the last time. As the door closed behind her, a strange calm washed over me. The pain was still there, deep and raw, but there was something else too. A sense of finality, of closure. The lies were gone. The pretending was over. And as I stood there in the silence, I realized that this wasn't the end for me. It was the beginning.